Okay, Mr. Streisfield, you're on.
Mr. Chair, just a really quick clarification point. I've got my parking panel that had at least initially I had hoped to call today. I note it's 3:30 right now. I understand from my friend that he anticipates being the rest of the day in class. He anticipates being the rest of the day in class, so I'm just wondering whether it should. Should I keep my parking witnesses here today? Yeah.
Whatever happens with Mr. Streisfield, you got re-examination?
I do, but at this point, I don't have that many questions. I'm not sure how many other parties might.
Well, as of right now, my colleague and I suggest parking tomorrow.
Thank you.
Starting again at 9:30.
Thank you.
Go.
Thank you. So just before the break, I indicated to you that I wanted to go into the area of your testimony that related to these principles of settlement with TSMJC.
Okay.
Now, do you recall your testimony regarding these principles of settlement?
I had indicated, yes, there was some principles of settlement. The language would still be to be sorted out. What specifically do you want me to recall?
Okay. Oh,
I can recall parts of it.
I want to make sure that I understand the principles.
Okay.
And just before I do that, I want to get clarification from the city and the tribunal. It is my understanding that what the city has asked the tribunal for is to basically approve everything on the west side and not prove anything on the east side of Yonge Street. Do I have that understanding correct, Barney?
Mr. Chair, I don't think that understanding is entirely correct.
Please.
There are, as I think Mr. Annabelle also indicated, certain secondary plan policies that they support coming into force through this phase 1 hearing. There are also certain part 1 OP policies that they support coming into force. Putting those aside, the settlement in principle with TSMJC, which would likewise apply to lands in the Northeast Quadrant as well, is that whatever the tribunal approves in relation to the secondary plan would not come into force as it relates to lands on the east side of Yonge Street. It would only come into force in relation to lands on the west side. And it would also be subject to the without prejudice language that we've discussed, of course.
So I just want to understand, is this the city's position as a consequence of its discussion or settlement with TSMJC? Because nobody has ever told me that there was ever any intention that no part, certainly the transportation related stuff, which is, I believe, what TSMJC is more concerned about, at least as far as this phase. What is the city actually asking be brought into force on the east side? I need to know that before I complete my cross-examination of this transportation panel. And right now I have no clue. So I would ask for the city to clearly articulate what policies it is asking this tribunal to bring in force on the east side, and what policies it is not asking the tribunal to bring in force on the east side.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, there is the Part 1 official plan policies. There are proposed modifications to those policies that are being finalized with TSMJC. There will be those policies that will be sought to be brought into force on the east side of Yonge Street. There is in the secondary plan a number of policies that are strictly related to the settlement that was reached with TSMJC or the settlement on the bus terminal policies that we now have a policy for. Those will be sought to be brought into force on the east side of Yonge Street. Other than that, as it relates to the remainder of the secondary plan, we are not seeking to bring that into force on the east side of Yonge Street. As it relates to the zoning bylaw, nothing in the zoning bylaw is sought to be brought into force on the east side of Yonge Street. I thought I had indicated this in some of the preliminary submissions that were made. It was provided as an additional concession to provide further comfort so that those landowners on the east side of Yonge Street didn't simply have to rely on the without prejudice clause, but also had the additional benefit of knowing the actual provisions that they may have issues with are not actually coming into effect.
Thank you. I think I understand now. Just before we get to the principles of settlement, are there any transportation issues related to the proposed policies, Part 1 amendment policies? Are you familiar with what's being proposed in terms of an amendment to the Part 1 plan?
I'd have to go back and look exactly.
Sorry, Barney, are there any transportation related issues in the proposed Part 1 amendments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe there are, but Ms. Anderson will be speaking to those to the extent that they're part of the proposed settlement, and I believe TSMJC's witnesses will be speaking to them as well.
Dan, I take it that you have read the very detailed submissions that have been made by TSMJC, I would say from 2017 all the way up to this hearing in connection with all matters that relate to their lands, relate to the secondary plan. You read those documents?
Over time, yes.
Right. And
you'd have to tell me what document specifically.
no, that's fair. That's fair. I just want to know if if you read anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
right. So as I understand it, in 2017, the former council, Mr. Platt for TSMJC, had advised the city through its comments that because of a high water table, that created certain limitations, in fact, limitations with respect to even possibly building a road on their lands. Is anything of that, does that twig a bell in your mind? Anything along those lines?
So, Mr. Chair, we're now getting into the issue of the merits of a ring road system within a specific quadrant, which in my respectful submission is a phase 2 issue.
Actually,
I have no issue with the concept. If I could just finish, please. I have no issue with questions and cross-examination relating to the merits of a ring road generally, as we've just gone through for the last 2 hours. But when it now translates down to the merits within a quadrant specific context, that's a phase 2 issue.
I actually wasn't asking that question as a phase 2 issue. It was just to use that as an example. I'll go to all the quadrants. I was just using that as an example. So once again,
Hope the example is going to be wrapped into something.
by the way, as a transportation planner, did you, from a transportation perspective, perform any opportunities or constraints analysis in order to prepare any transportation-related policies that are now being proffered to this tribunal for approval?
Opportunities and constraints. Did I personally do that? No, it would have been done through the exercises that we were under. Exercise like that would have been undertaken through the exercises that went through the secondary plan process, like through our planning consultants and our transportation consultants.
So
what specifically are?
Well, that's what I'm asking you from the transportation perspective. Did you identify any opportunities or constraints that would inform any transportation policies that you wanted to bring forward?
I would say yes, through the process of developing the secondary plan, opportunities and constraints were considered.
Where would we find a list of quote unquote transportation related opportunities and constraints?
Well, both transportation studies actually speak to different scenarios and alternative networks that were considered through the transportation. Right? So maybe Mr. Wong can speak to that with a little bit more detail, but there was certainly some different opportunities and different scenarios for road links in the ring road system and the network, right, that were considered through his analysis.
Okay. So is there a page, sorry, my question is now going to Carl. Is there an opportunities and constraints analysis in HDR's transportation report?
There is a opportunities and constraints, but it's not summarized in a list. But if you refer to the network that we analyzed previously in the draft report in February, it definitely has changed and captured in the May 2020 report. And so those constraints have to do with, for example, justice connection that changed, as well as link A, the alignment changed in terms of connecting now Bernard and Yonge Street, whereas it used to connect to Yorkland. So those are examples of opportunities that led us to make modifications to the network.
Where's my secondary plan? Dan, I take it you're familiar with the City of Richmond Hills official plan?
Yes, fairly familiar with it.
And the secondary plan provisions found under section, is it 5.1.5 of the city's official plan? I'll put it right in front of you in 1 second.
Okay. Sorry, I did want to add, with respect to your last question on the opportunities and constraints.
Yes.
And as I indicated, in addition to what Carl said, as I indicated through the secondary plan process, there was a level of opportunity and constraint that was evaluated based on some concerns that were specifically raised throughout the public consultation processes. And those were actually addressed through council report. I'm just looking for the exact date of that council report. But in there, it did talk about various opportunity and constraints that were raised, and they're specifically addressed by the city, as you may be aware.
So I'm asking, where would I find this?
It was in the report. I don't know exactly. I need to verify the tab right now, exactly where it's located, but it was in.
So
there's a very large document book. So trying to find the documents.
Yeah.
It was just, if you could indulge me here.
Oh, so the tribunal may be wondering if we need this level of detail, and I was just wondering if I could assist the tribunal. Under section 5.1.5 of the city's official plan, Raj, can you tell me where we would find that in the joint document book? I'll just continue on what you'll tell us. So under section 5.1.5 of the city's official plan, Mr. Kussner will correct me if I'm wrong. Section 5 says new secondary plans shall include at a minimum, comma, information and policies, with respect to the following colon, A, B, C, D, E, and item F says, the opportunities and constraints posed by unique features or characteristics. And the shopping list for matters that have to be studied and for which policies need to be prepared for a secondary plan are all set out under section 5.1 of the city's official plan. So with respect, I would think you would absolutely need to know this, because you would need to be satisfied that in fact, the entire planning process, transportation, in fact, meets the requirements of the preparation of a secondary plan, both in regards to—
Frankly, Mr. Streisfield, you can make that suggestion. Is this the appropriate witness to answer that question? You're talking about the planning document there. You were earlier talking about the constraints and opportunities with respect to transportation. So let's get our ballpark straightened out.
I just wanted to make sure, sir, that there was an absolute proper foundation for my question.
So with respect to the council report is in tab 23, and it speaks to the process in which the public consultation occurred. As part of that, staff looked at various opportunities outside of the Boundary Road network to address some of the specific concerns and whatnot. So that is one example of the process, but throughout the process, there was certainly input and taken and looking at constraints and opportunities that were raised throughout the discussions and public consultations of the secondary plan.
So I'm sorry.
If you expect it to be documented somewhere, it's likely documented in a number of documents throughout the secondary plan process.
So
there's no list of specific opportunities, and if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm looking for any analysis done by the city, whether it's from—
The analysis inherent to the secondary plan process exercise. Transportation is a component and one of the topics in that whole process, and opportunities are assessed. It's similar to a master planning process.
Okay, no, I understand that. So I'm just asking you, so you say that there is some list of opportunities or constraints referred to in the staff report?
All I'm pointing is that staff report as an example of issues that were raised as constraints or potential opportunities to add additional capacity in the network. And there is an example of how staff have assessed some opportunities and constraints and have provided responses to council.
The staff report that you're talking about, is that the May 13th, 2020 staff report or some other staff report?
That is SRPRS 17.167. Let me check the date.
17. So I'm going to assume then
November 1st, 2017.
November 1st, 2017. Is that document in the joint document book?
It is. I told you.
Sorry.
Tab number 23, sir.
Tab 23. Okay. And was that document updated for the purposes, it was done in 2017, was that document updated, or any of the opportunities and constraints?
Well, yes, it's been updated in terms of, yes, there's been several reports that policy planning staff have developed and taken to council throughout this process to update them on how the KDA process has unfolded. Obviously, this has been a long process that started in 2016, and here we are in 2020 still adjudicating this process.
Mm-hmm.
And so through that process, in the beginning, likely there was more opportunities and constraints that needed to be assessed, and through that, in the process, we've refined it. And Mr. Wong, I actually identified that he's also, through his study, looked at different opportunities and constraints in terms of the network itself and assessed different options and scenarios. So through the process, yes, I believe that we've adequately addressed all an opportunities and constraints analysis in the sense that it's part of the public process, it's part of the transportation component that we've gone through, and it's part of the traffic analysis that has been completed to date.
And so, again, what I'm after is, give us an example, if you can, of a transportation opportunity and or a transportation constraint.
A transportation opportunity, or I'll point to one specifically in this.
So yeah, I want a sense of
Yeah.
what this means. I mean, the official plan says you've got to do this analysis. I want to know what it
So
means on the transportation side.
At one point, there was an opportunity that was asked to be explored as to provide an additional capacity to Yorkland Avenue through the adjacent neighborhood by providing a right turn only onto Elgin Mills. That was explored, one from a sort of operational impact perspective, but also explored with the region as an opportunity, and it turned out it was not a feasible opportunity. So that's one example that's specifically spoken to here.
Other
Other opportunities, and Mr. Wong can actually probably specify the scenario better than I can, but obviously I was involved in that discussion with him. Opportunities, there's been opportunities to look at the potential for right in, right out road links and to assess what the potential impacts are.
Where, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, that's fine. So that's part of the analysis. Mr. Wong, like I said, could speak to that.
Can you help us understand where there might be a reference to any opportunities and constraints? First of all, you weren't around in 2017, correct?
Oh,
So,
I wasn't specifically, sir, I was not specifically referring to 2017. I said there's opportunities and constraints that have gone on consistently throughout the process. And as comments from various stakeholders, including landowners and residents, have been brought forward, we have looked at the opportunities and constraints of those, and our consultants have been directed to look at those opportunities and constraints, and we've engaged with the stakeholders responsible for making those decisions, including the York Region and Municipality of York.
So are you able to provide, Mr. Wong, any summary list of any opportunities or constraints that you have identified in the course of any of the work that you have done, clearly only from a transportation perspective? And just, you have to reference, if there's a list, I'm looking for a list and topics. That's what I want to know.
If
Pardon
you're
me.
looking, I would like to answer that.
I understand from the answer, maybe it hasn't got through, but I understand from Mr. T's evidence that there isn't a grand master list of opportunities and or stumbling blocks in any of this. It's a process. It may be contained in several documents throughout the whole thing. He said there's no master list. That's my impression.
There may be a master list of issues or something documented through policy planner somewhere in a spreadsheet. I'm not going to say that there, but there's nothing that I'm aware of or that's before us today. What I can tell you is that process did take place throughout the secondary plan process, that opportunities and constraints as they came up were evaluated and tested. So if there's something that you have a specific question about, specific opportunity or constraint, I'd be quite content to try to answer whether that's been addressed or not.
Okay, so just in terms of this list of constraints under opportunities, would you say, for example, that the fact that there is currently no grade separation along Elgin Mills, where the railroad is, would that be considered an opportunity and or constraint related to transportation issues concerning this secondary plan?
It was identified as a constraint.
Constraint.
And certainly, actually, that I believe was specifically spoken to in this report that I referred you to. I'd have to read through that in more detail, but yes, it was identified as constraint and definitely has been taken into account through the analysis. One of the reasons that the HDR reports, the scope of their study actually was broadened was for that exact reason, because there was constraints, potential constraints identified in the broader network that were identified by the residents group that we wanted to and needed to address to make sure that they were not constraints. And that's where Mr. Wong's study was expanded in terms of its boundary, in terms of its network analysis. So.
And can you explain, just using this grade separation, the grade separation issue, first of all, can you point out on, I think we could probably see it on the schedule behind you, what the issue is? I'm asking you a transportation question, right?
You mean just what a grade separation is? I think everybody knows that. Or are you asking location?
I want you to know where the location is, because as I understand it, what we're talking about now forms part of the holding provision that's being proposed. Is that correct?
That's what if we're talking about the holding provision.
No, I said that the reference to.
It is identified in the holding provision.
Thank you.
Not specifically. Anyway, we'll get to that.
Okay.
So the Elgin Mills grade separation, as you can see, there's the railway crossing right here at Elgin Mills here. And so the Elgin Mills grade separation would be proposed right at Elgin Mills and the railway crossing right there. That's currently an at-grade intersection. That is just to the east of Yorkland Drive, where it connects to Elgin Mills.
And in simple explanation, what is the constraint and what needs to be done about that constraint?
So the constraint right now, the crossing with the railway at Elgin Mills is an at-grade crossing. That carries freight traffic, and one of the potential problems right now. It also carries GO train traffic, but that doesn't seem to be the potential driver. It's the freight traffic where they're getting 40 to 50 or longer trains. The trains get longer and longer, and during the rush hour peak, when those trains are passing, there could be obstruction of that road for 10, 20, 30 minutes at times. I don't know the exact time, but there's a significant delay which causes operational problems during the peak hour, which I think I already gave evidence on.
Okay.
So grade separation would separate the two movements,
right,
so that those types of delays are not happening.
Now, I believe in your evidence, you had sort of indicated that this was in the region's capital plan?
Yes, it's in the region's 10-year capital program right now.
What is a capital program?
Capital program identifies the capital projects.
Yes.
That are going to be delivered by a municipality or a regional municipality for that matter.
Right.
And there's sort of the planned projects. And so they identify the year that they're going to be delivered. Oftentimes it identifies which aspects or facets of the project are going to be delivered, and it projects time.
And
the next 10 years. And basically it plans sort of the capital for the municipality.
And I just want to be clear, Carl can also answer this. I just want to be clear that do you have an opinion as to how much density can be, so we've got a KDA, and we're told that the proposal is to have a 4.0 FSI over the entire KDA. So you take the KDA area, tell me if I got this right, whatever it is, multiply it by 4, and you get all of the gross floor area that you anticipate. Well, this is what this plan wants to allow for. Is that correct? We got Mr. Carl saying I agree, and I'm not sure where you are.
I didn't quite understand your equation. Sorry, if you could repeat the equation, sir. I multiplied something by 4, but I didn't quite catch what you're multiplying by 4.
So 4.0 overall, right? So we have to take the entire area of the KDA.
Okay, the entire area of the KDA multiplied.
And basically you multiply by 4, you'll have a number of square feet, right?
More or less, that's right.
Okay.
Obviously there's some nuances in there, but okay.
I want to try to keep it simple for the people who are watching.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And what I want to understand is that how much density of this 4 overall, this is a question to you, how much density can actually be taken up, consumed out of that 4 without any grade separation?
So I'll start that answer, and I think if there's some more details.
Is that a proper question?
That's a proper question.
Okay.
So I think it's been reiterated over and over again, but so based on the analysis that was done actually by the BA group and then by Mr. Wong as well, there's an indication that up to 3.0 FSI can be taken up in that KDA. The difference is that Mr. Wong's analysis has gone a step further and said that you could uptake up to 4.0 FSI, provided that certain infrastructure is actually in place in that broader network to provide additional capacity in the surrounding network. And so, Mr. Wong can elaborate if you'd like.
Yeah, so we don't need the grade separation to occur to get to an uptake of 3.0, is that correct?
I'll let Mr. Wong respond to that as he did the technical work on this.
Is that what we're talking about?
The 10-year capital program is required to support additional density in the KDA. This includes the grade separation. So this is needed to take it up to 3.0. So the implementation of the 10-year capital program.
And now I'm confused. I thought Dan, okay, so Dan, you're deferring to Carl. And as I understand it, Carl's now saying, so I'm going to ask the question again to Carl.
I can clarify that response.
Well, because I'm confused, because I thought you said, I thought with no grade separation, you get to 3. And he's now.
No.
Okay, repeat. Let's clarify this.
So Mr. Wong is right that the infrastructure identified within the 10-year capital plan is required to support over time 3.0 FSI. The holding provision does not require that infrastructure to be in place before we can support a 3.0, because most of the projects identified in that 10-year plan are either currently under construction, have been completed, either currently under construction, or construction is expected to start within the next 5 years in that plan. So there was enough confidence that as the KDA was developing over time, that those projects were going to be delivered in a timely manner, so that by the time we got up to 3.0 FSI, those projects are likely going to be there because there's some certainty. They're in a 10-year capital plan. There's some certainty for those projects. And actually a good chunk of them are already under construction.
Okay. So
hopefully that provides that.
I think I now understand that to get to 3.0, I think as Carl said, the grade separation must occur in 5 years.
By the time we get to 3.0, it's not going to prohibit approval of densities up to 3.0 FSI.
Right.
But beyond that, we want to make sure that infrastructure is in place, because that's what we feel is the infrastructure that needs to be in place to support anything beyond that.
So let's assume for the moment that York Region is broke and all of their capital plans, they're all, I mean, they can, well, you know this because you worked at the region. What project may be in a capital plan in the future can get bumped and shelved, right?
Correct.
Right. So there is no certainty as to whether or not that piece of infrastructure will ever get built.
There's a better level of certainty with that list of infrastructure.
But there is 100% certainty, by way of an example, that the bus rapid transit, well, we see it being built, correct?
Correct.
Right. And
as with many of the projects, you're talking about one specific project, which is the grade separation. But actually, the holding provision identified a list of regional projects. Again, so many of which are currently under construction.
Okay.
Including the bus rapid transit.
Which of these projects the grade separation is not under construction because you're telling us you hope it'll be done within the capital plan.
It is being programmed for 2026.
I understand programmed, right? It's being budgeted, sitting here today to spend money 5 years from now. What infrastructure is actually being built now to support a minimum of 3.0 FSO?
It was actually clearly outlined in my witness statement, I believe, but I can try to go over that again. Let me just find the relevant section.
Can that question be answered by the panel?
Of course.
If you already
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah, we are aware that of the current construction, the ones that have completed are Bayview Avenue and 19th Avenue to Bayview. The Leslie Street widening is also occurring. And the two remaining projects that are to be scheduled include Elgin Mills widening west of Yonge, as well as the completion of the widening of 19th east of Bayview to Leslie, which is based on developments
Which will be delivered as part of development.
In any of the streets that you just referred to, are those streets streets where you have a bus rapid transit? Does Bayview Avenue have a bus rapid?
Yeah, not at this time.
Sorry, what other, those are regional roads you were referring to?
Correct.
Right. So these regional roads are under construction now? The widenings that you're talking about?
The ones I mentioned, yes.
Right. So is there anything, like, I just want to know what's in your sort of infrastructure category that is not under construction, that if it never gets built, it won't really matter, because what is proposed at 3 FSI from a transportation perspective, I think you would be recommending to the board to approve the transportation system, if that's what your view is, whether or not certain of this infrastructure never gets built. Most of it's there, right?
Yeah, trying to understand the question or rephrase it. Are you asking which of these improvements could be, if it didn't happen, would not affect the potential to attain 3.0 FSI?
Correct.
I think, in my opinion, I would say that it could be the grade separation, because it does not change the actual capacity of Elgin Mills, because Elgin Mills is 4 lanes today. Even with the grade separation, it's still 4 lanes. So the railway interruption is definitely a delay to the peak, but it doesn't change the actual lane capacity on Elgin Mills itself. It remains at 4 lanes. So it would improve the delays, but it doesn't change the capacity in terms of allowing more development to occur beyond the 4 lanes.
So just to be clear, are you of the opinion that there is enough regional infrastructure under construction, not what's planned, under construction, to allow at least 3.0 FSI?
In my opinion, no, because I only refer to the grade separation. You still have the completion of the widening of Elgin Mills, as well as 19th Avenue to Leslie, as 2 other infrastructure that hasn't happened yet. I think the Elgin Mills one is an important one, because it will help to divert traffic away from Yonge Street towards Bathurst. And Bathurst, as we know, is going to be widened to 6 lanes to the south, which will help dispute traffic away from the KDA.
So let me ask the question slightly different. Of the infrastructure projects that are currently being constructed, what amount of FSI, up to 4, would you be supporting only based on the regional infrastructure projects that you are aware of under construction? I'm not talking about things that are planned future. I want to know what infrastructure is being built that allows you to tell the tribunal that you are comfortable that just based on that infrastructure being constructed, an overall density of, I don't know, 3 or whatever it is, of the total 4 can be achieved as of this point in time.
That's not a scenario that we've analyzed before, so I can't answer that question without doing the analysis for that specific scenario.
I take it okay, I'm going to move on. Dan, sorry, I had one question that I had from him. Carl, you are aware in the BA 2017 transportation report, there was a schedule referencing the net trip generation rates that were applicable by Quadrant.
Correct.
Okay. And I take it, first of all, did you prepare a similar chart indicating the net trip generation rates per quadrant based on the proposed densities to be assigned per quadrant?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And can you, first of all, what page of your report, or where would you, it doesn't matter, just tell us what it is.
Okay. The details are not documented in the HDR May 2020 report. I would refer to, let's see, table 4-22 on page 67 of the report. There's a summary table that compares the difference between BA and HDR. However, this table is for the total KDA and not broken down. We didn't include a more detailed level comparison in our report, but I do have that comparison with me that I can share.
Okay, so with respect to the BA report, do you know which page they have their trip gens on?
Not off the top of my head, but I
Give me 1 second, I'll find it.
Mr. Wong, could I just ask you to clarify? You mentioned that it wasn't broken down. What was not broken down?
Meaning when we provided the trip generation, it wasn't broken down by block. It was provided for the total. Yeah, correct. It wasn't broken down by the 4 quadrants. I found the reference.
So BA 2017 report.
Yeah, it's provided on table 16 of the report, which is on page 77 of the 2017 report.
And do you know what the consecutive page in the, it's in the joint document book, Raj, do you happen to know what the consecutive page is? So that the tribunal knows where exactly to find what we're looking for?
It's on tab 72. I'm just figuring out the consecutive page right now. The documents page number was again?
Page 77.
Okay.
Page 4327.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So on page 4327 of the joint document book, we're looking at table 16. And the previous transportation consultants broke down the forecast, and just tell me if I've got this right. This was based on 3.0 FSI, not 4, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the previous transportation consultant, by virtue of table 16, was trying to tell everybody what the forecast was minus the existing. And when we got net new site, this is a very detailed table, correct?
Correct.
And the principle, as I understand it, putting the numbers aside, if you have an existing site, that site generates traffic, correct?
Correct.
And therefore, you take what the future density is in the trip gens, whatever it is, and you subtract it and you get net new site traffic, correct?
If it depends on what happens with those existing uses. Are they continue to exist, or do they get replaced by the new?
I thought the table 16 that we're looking at makes it obvious that we're dealing with what is ultimately net new traffic. Of course it's replaced. It's 100% replaced.
Okay, I agree.
Okay, so I just want to deal with the principle. I'm looking at table 16, and I'm looking at the northeast quadrant. See that?
Yes.
And the net new traffic from the northeast quadrant is indicated to be on the in AM minus 80. See that? And on the out minus 85 and two-way minus 65. See that?
Yes.
So I'm just using that as one example. We'll go through a few more. If this tribunal is approving 3 or 4 FSI or whatever, 5 doesn't matter, on the intensification site, by virtue of this document, at least in the AM and the PM, the northeast quadrant has net new traffic in the negative. Is that correct?
It is correct based on the assumptions that BA assumed to arrive at this. So it would be the 3 FSI, and it would be the transit mode split that they assumed, which was, I believe, 17% for this scenario. Yes.
Right. Okay. But I'm just talking about the principle, because like the public seems to think out there that if you have all this density, you're going to create all this more traffic. And my question to you is, when you look and interpret table 16, I'm just talking about the principle. With respect to the northeast quadrant, even at 3.0 FSI for the quadrant as a whole, it's still a net new, it's a negative fill in the blank.
Correct.
It's a negative site generator. So in other words, if we build these big condominiums on our site, according to this table, we'll be generating
Less.
traffic than leaving it the way it currently is. Is that correct?
Yeah, based on whatever the land user units that PA assume, yes.
I'm just talking about the principle.
Yes.
And the modal split.
Yes, of course, and the modal split.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we look, for example, now, of course, we have greenfield sites. There wouldn't be any existing, so there's nothing to subtract. We see zeros. From the northwest quadrant, we got zeros. See that?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then when we go to the southeast quadrant, so if I'm correct, the only quadrant in this KDA that would be a net negative site generator, according to table 16, based on 3.0 FSI, is North 70 Bernard. Is that right?
Yes, based on this table, that would be correct.
If that's true, North Elgin wouldn't, and 70 Bernard wouldn't need any grade separation to be constructed, correct? Because we're negative net site generators, right?
It all depends on timing, or who's going first in terms of the development. That's the key. So is North Elgin being developed at the same time as the others? If so, then you have to take the entirety of the additional traffic from the KDA and not be site specific.
And now, sorry, in your
Attention. We are testing generator excitability, so the elevator is out of service. And repeating, we are testing generator excitability, so the elevator is out of service. Thank you.
do you have, sir, based on the 4 FSI, any table equivalent to table 16 that would demonstrate what the quadrant's net site generation might look like under 4 FSI?
Yeah, I can share an example where we see table 16 has the 195 outbound trips for the northeast quadrant. Our equivalent value would be in the 172 range based on 30% mode split. And a distribution based on the city's land use and what they assign to the northeast.
Under your 4.0 analysis, if we go by quadrant, the southwest quadrant, that's the Longos Dogliola quadrant, does that, under the 4.0 analysis, is that a net new positive or negative traffic generator?
Positive.
Positive, okay. And with respect to the northwest quadrant, according to your analysis, is that quadrant a net new positive or negative traffic generator?
That'd be positive.
And with respect to the northeast quadrant, according to your analysis, is that quadrant a net new positive or negative generator?
Negative with respect to the minus 280 compared to the 172.
And with respect to the southeast quadrant, does your analysis indicate whether or not there would be a net Positive or negative site?
Positive. I thought you already went through that one, but yeah,
No,
positive.
I was starting, I'm going down to southeast.
Yeah, positive.
Positive.
Yep.
So on a quadrant basis, based on your analysis, what does it mean to the public that only one of the 4 quadrants that you've just given your evidence on is a net new negative site generator of traffic based on your 4.0 analysis? What does it mean to the general public in layman's terms?
In layman's terms, there would be less traffic on the driveways and surrounding roads.
And the driveways that you are talking about, do those include the driveways that are in the northeast quadrant?
If you're referring to the 3 existing access points?
Any driveways, any access points that may exist in the northeast quadrant of the secondary plan area?
Since I reviewed the ANC report, I have information that would give me some additional information, because one of the driveways is being eliminated, which would shift traffic over to another driveway. So that would actually increase traffic for whatever is remaining. But in general, as a whole, there'll be less traffic.
And in terms of this business about the net positive or net negative in a KDA quadrant as a whole, is it your opinion that whatever new traffic is generated as a consequence of development now being proposed at 4 FSI over the entire KDA, that net new traffic is minimal regardless on the KDA wide basis?
I would agree to that.
And therefore, is it your opinion that the residents need not be concerned about additional traffic based on the analysis that you have undertaken to indicate that even though there is new traffic, it's minimal?
I would agree to that statement.
Now, as I understand it, the transportation system, what we were just speaking about, is only the road capacity, correct?
Correct.
And as I understand it as well, if you were planning or doing development in the 1970s or 60s or 80s, transportation planners really only focused on the ability to move vehicles, correct?
Correct.
And we're now here in 2020. There's been a fundamental paradigm shift in terms of transportation capacity assessment. That is to say, we don't just look at the capacity of a road, we look at the capacity of active transportation, we look at the capacity of any transit, and that now becomes the bigger picture upon which we assess capacity. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if the taxpayers of the province of Ontario can be assured of one thing, there is currently unused capacity on the bus rapid transit network that is supposed to be moving through this KDA. Is that correct?
By unused, do you mean it's not full in terms of passenger ridership, or?
It's got capacity. There's lots of capacity on the transportation system that is being constructed.
It has the capacity to carry the forecast demands, including the KDA.
So even though the road capacity that we looked at in terms of the additional traffic that would be generated from the KDA based on 4 FSI, even though I think you said, yes, there's more overall, but in the scheme of things, it's insignificant overall, right? And the reason for that is because we've got all this capacity sitting there in the transit system that's unused. It hasn't been taken up yet, right? And we've got, and we also got the unused capacity in the active transportation system that hasn't been taken up yet, correct?
Correct.
And therefore, if there's anything that we're going to learn from this hearing today, is that the transportation system as a whole, BRT, active, and the road, right? There's lots of transportation capacity to easily allow 4.0 FSI in this entire KDA. Isn't that your opinion to this tribunal?
I wouldn't use the word easily, but
there's lots.
but yeah, what the analysis we determined is that 4 FSI can be accommodated by the planned network and the proposed improvements for both active transit and roads.
Mr. Straisfield, we are here at the second day in the late afternoon. You've had the witnesses really confirm what they already gave us in their evidence in chief. We've come full circle and got it confirmed. Can you give me a really good idea of what you want to do with that?
Do with what?
Where are you going? Because you've got about 10 minutes before we are going to close it down under that rule that we already gave you the advice of this morning. Because tomorrow morning at 9:30, we are starting the next panel.
Very good. I would like to now move back to these principles of settlement.
You've got 10 minutes. Remind us again, I think it was about an hour and a half ago, you were going to start into that area. It's the principles deriving from what?
So in the course of Mr. Annabelle's friendly cross-examination of this current panel on Friday.
Get onto it.
What?
Get onto it. Yep.
Go ahead.
Oh, I thought you wanted to know what I was talking about.
No, get on to what you're getting at.
So Dan, can you just refresh your thoughts on what those principles of settlement were?
Respect to which item, the holding provision or street network?
So tell you what I'll do. I'll try to paraphrase from my notes.
Sure.
So I think Mr. Annabelle put to you that you indicated that there was a settlement in principle with respect to the collector and local streets policies.
Yes, I think there's a settlement in principle with respect to those policies.
And those policies would be concerning what lands on the exhibit.
Well, okay, so those policies, principles of those policies actually different than the earlier discussion we had today. If they become policy and they're inserted in the document, actually apply to the entire KDA.
Right.
Including your client's lands.
And that's why I'm so anxious to hear what they are.
So the policies, I guess, confirm what the city has already been undertaking, as you're aware of. And I gave in my evidence in chief that the city is undertaking a study to look at the potential for permitting stratified road networks within the municipality and specifically within the KDA, but beyond that as well. And looking at where it's appropriate to use that and what type of stratification would be permitted. So this policy, it basically takes a step at reinforcing our commitment to looking at that. And the policy has a bunch of conditions associated with it, specifically speaking that it would require a council approved policy before stratification would be permitted, that it demonstrates that you can demonstrate that the provision of a conventional road actually adversely impacts the ability for you to develop a site. It doesn't impede the city's ability to operate, service, maintain, or replace that infrastructure over the long term, and that it maintains the functional characteristics identified that we spoke to earlier, basically functional characteristics of a local and a collector road. So it's got to basically be designed and it's got to basically be a collector or a local road within the parameters identified in the Part 1 plan. And that if required, it protects for the provision of services or utilities in that corridor. And those are amongst some of the principles we talked about. So
there are changes to, I think it's section 12.4, or is it 4.2 of the secondary plan. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to read my notes the best I can take them, and you just tell me if I've got this right. Mr. Annabelle was asking you to confirm his understanding of this settlement.
Sure.
You understand that that's what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, he was saying, first of all, that a collector road and local streets on the schedules are all shown conceptually for his site. And I think you said that's correct.
Well, it already says that actually in the policy, that the minor revisions can be made without the require for a official plan amendment. Minor revisions can be made to the road network, which you agree that policy is currently there. The language that's being contemplated would only provide some clarification that that the road network can be adjusted from what's seen on the plan, provided that it still continues to service the function and the intended use of what's identified through the secondary plan. So that means that, alignments can change and can tweak based on, as we get more detail with respect to development concepts, they can be adjusted. And that applies actually throughout the secondary plan, and my interpretation of the secondary plan as it currently.
So there's nothing new then there?
Only some clarity from that perspective and some comfort to give some clarity to that position that minor adjustments can be made as long as the function of the plan is seen.
And then I think Mr. Annabelle asked you to confirm also that the location and their configuration and size may even change.
Correct. And I gave evidence earlier that it just reiterates that the size, there's some flexibility with respect to that size, location, and function. As I said to you, the functionality of a road and the classification of a road isn't just driven by the right-of-way width, that we also currently have policies in the Part 1 plan that the secondary plan currently refers to that speak to flexibility within road widths, and all this would do is just reconfirm that position, that we have some flexibility in terms of the width and the size, provided that the function of the road is maintained adequately in accordance with the policies and principles laid out in the secondary plan.
And so that's the first item. The second item, I think I've almost got this verbatim. The second item has to do with stratification.
Correct.
And I believe you said, actually, I think Mr. Annabelle was talking and he was saying to you, Dan, you talked a little bit about stratification, but I think the policy goes further than that, and perhaps you can confirm or correct, but I think that my understanding of the settlement is that it opens the door or permits the use of not only stratified public streets, but private streets with public access easements over them as well. And he asked you, is that correct? And you said, I did touch on that a little bit. So is that correct?
So that is actually correct, because
Okay.
because I used, and I think I explained this. I think this question did come up, Mr. Annabelli at the time. I explained it to him that yes, when we use the term stratification, we also sort of expanded broadly through that study to potentially look at the use of easements over roads to ensure public accessibility. The key principle here is public accessibility and the functionality of it. I'm not suggesting that this policy is not going to suggest that that will be permitted. The policy first and foremost suggests that there will be a council approved policy which speaks to stratification or the use of easements for public access as appropriate. And that'll be determined through the stratification study. So there's nothing that I think that is being proposed that actually materially changes what the plan currently says. All it really does is just actually reconfirm the position. You got to remember the genesis of this, and I explained it, and maybe I don't want to take up too much time, but in 2017, there was actually specific policy in the secondary plan being proposed that actually prohibited the use of stratification. And then through the comment process, and again, this goes back to this discussion about opportunities and assessments for opportunities or constraints. Through all this, one of the opportunities that was being considered was, we heard it over and over again, stratification to be able to build this KDA out properly. And through that process, the first step we made in the amendments that you currently see in the plan before us was to actually delete that specific reference, because the municipality decided to undertake a stratification study, right? And so to not prejudice the outcome of that study within this KDA secondary plan, we removed that language that specifically spoke to the stratification of public road or of the road system. So all this does is takes that one step further and basically says it's subject to a council approved policy and other criteria as required by the municipality. There may be the opportunity. So all it does is validate the position that we just took by deleting that language. So I hopefully that clarifies and answers the position.
Let me go further then. I'm not sure your clarification is giving Mr. Annabelli the comfort, but doesn't matter. I want to just address this notion of that with respect to this business about stratification. You're saying that there cannot be a stratification policy approved in this official plan proceeding until you bring forward a study next year and council approves it? Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Hopefully prior to next year.
Well, no.
The study is currently underway. Yes, that's actually, yes, that's what I am saying. Yes.
That there has to be council approval of the stratification policy. Right? He said that quite a while ago. And that's your last question, and that's the last answer. And we thank you. It seems to me, at least in this part of, from where I sit, that we've come full circle, and we have certainly confirmed the evidence in chief of the witnesses through your cross-examination. And we're satisfied that the scope of both days, the day and a half or whatever it is, has been satisfactory. And that's the completion of your cross-examination.
I did have one follow-up question that related to yours.
No.
That's fine. Fair enough. I would just ask, not that the witness answered, I want to just put the question on the record and that it's being refused so that we know what the question is. And then he doesn't have to answer it. That's fine. I accept it. I just want to be able to put my question on the record.
Go ahead. Ask the question.
Thank you. Okay. So
no, not get an answer to, at least from us.
Right. So I'll direct my question to the chair. So it was suggested here that we have to wait for another study before a policy might come up with stratification. And my question for the witness was going to be this. Isn't it the case that the board, the tribunal, stands in the shoes of council? And if it is the case that the tribunal stands in the shoes of council,
is that a proper question for a transportation engineer? Frankly, no.
Okay, I just want to finish my question. I know it's a no. He doesn't have to answer. I just want to finish the question. Isn't it the case that this tribunal has all the powers of counsel in this proceeding, and therefore it can draft a stratification policy before it approves anything? Isn't that the case? No answer required.
You're not going to get one. So that's it.
Thank you.
Or Tahar, or
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was just going to point out as an observation that at the rate we're going, the phase 2 hearing in this proceeding will take place well after the stratification study is completed. So there will be ample opportunity on a quadrant specific basis to seek policy modifications in due course.
thanks.
That's it. Sorry, sir. Is that no. Thank you very much. It's not a housekeeping, you're a trace.
I'm very sorry, Mr. Chair. I don't know if I do have one question, only one arising. Sorry, this is Mr. Cherniak.
You can't have another one now.
Well,
you finished off yesterday.
It's something new that hadn't been said. It's just one question. I think it's fair clarification from the witness.
I think not at this point in time. Thanks very much, Mr. Turniak. Oh,
okay.
Anything further, Mr. Kussner, on your witnesses?
Mr. Kahar might have some very brief re-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Cherniak went to a line of questions suggesting that the H would kick in after the 10,400 residents and jobs per hectare. And my question to the panel is, when does the H bylaw come into effect on the KDA lands?
From a technical perspective, from a policy perspective?
From a policy perspective.
I believe, and I think a policy planner will need to clarify that, but my understanding is that it actually takes effect right from the beginning. The question is what you need to technically clear in terms of that holding provision up until that first trigger. I don't believe there's anything real, maybe more of an administrative exercise.
Mr. Cherniak went to a line of questioning suggesting that you, and this is for Mr. Wilson, that you did not count traffic generated from retail uses in the AMP. Mr. Wong, are those retail uses open at that time?
In regards to the retail uses, there's a plaza, service, commercial, as well as grocery stores. So at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. in the morning, they wouldn't typically be open. So they wouldn't be generating, even if they were open early for some unique circumstances, they wouldn't be generating a lot of traffic anyways.
Mr. Cherniak had questions about whether we should plan to 2041, and I believe you put it to the panel that you should plan to 2031 because it required less assumption. My question to Dan T is, are there any provincial policies that this secondary plan is required to conform to that would require you to plan to 2041?
Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any provincial policies that require the planning to 2041. I can't recall a specific policy.
So let maybe put the question another way. What is the planning horizon of the secondary plan?
The planning horizon of the secondary plan is to 2041.
Mr. Cherniak went to a comparison of the secondary plan table, Mr. Wong, that was contained in the HDR report, or rather the table that was in the HDR report and the comparison of it to the secondary plan table that's actually in the plan. You recall that?
Yes. Yes.
All right, so my question to you is, for each of the scenarios that are identified in that table, in your table in your HDR report, what's been carried forward into the secondary plan, is that meet your recommendation, or is it less or more conservative than your recommendation?
Sorry, can you repeat the last sentence?
So, and it might help if you actually pull the documents up, but basically what I'm asking is there is a table in your report. That table is then carried forward into the secondary plan. In carrying it forward, has it complied with all of your recommendations?
Yeah, what was carried forward is not exactly the same, but it generally has been carried forward in terms of our recommendations.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, Mr. Cherniak went to paragraph 22 of your witness statement and identified a number of movements that had vehicle capacity ratios above 1.0. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so my question is, have you looked at approximately how many cars a 1.03 VC would actually translate to as being over capacity?
Yes, it's approximately the same in terms of traffic at that sort of small range. So 3%, a VRC that's 1.03 is about 3% of the traffic that would be more than desirable with a VRC of 1. So if there was 500 vehicles triggering a 1.03, it would be 15 extra cars that would be over, and which to me is a minimal amount of traffic.
Thank you. Mr. Streisfield went to a line of questioning and identified a missing segment, what he characterized as a missing segment of the road on 10870 Yonge Street in the short and medium term. Do you recall that? And my question to you is, could that segment be obtained through a redevelopment application?
How is that proper? How is that proper? That's not close. That's not even proper. That is not a proper question. By way of reply, it's not proper.
Okay. So let me rephrase the question. You did go to that question, Streisfield, and my follow-up question is simply, what mechanisms are in place that can be utilized to obtain the road?
That road can be secured through a development application. Through that settlement, obviously there is some flexibility as to what type of development application and at what point, but it can definitely be secured through a development application. And it can be secured through, I guess, an amicable agreement between the municipality as well as the parties to basically construct it as a capital project or a third-party project. And then obviously there's other triggers that we could use to, I guess, acquire the lands and then deliver that project as a capital project as well. So there's many ways to deliver that project if and when it's necessary to be delivered.
Mr. Streisfield asked you whether there is a defined term for ring road in many of the approved documents, and those your evidence was that that term was not in the secondary plan. My question to you is, does anything turn on the absence of that word in the secondary plan?
Sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
Does anything turn on the absence of the word ring road in the secondary plan?
It does not.
Thank you. Mr. Streisfield took you to policy 5.1.5 of the official plan, and that's the policy that speaks to the opportunities and constraints. Does anything in that policy require you to produce a list?
Sorry, could I just reference the policy? What was the number again?
That was policy 5.1.5 of the official plan, and he took you to sub F.
That's the regional official plan?
Secondary plan.
Oh, the secondary.
Sorry, that's in the, I'm sorry. The City of Richmond Hills official plan.
5.1.5, sure, if you don't mind. Thank you. Oop. Thank you. Can you remind me again the policy specifically?
I think it was 5.1.5.
New secondary plans shall include at a minimum, and I did provide this policy, I think, with respect to my witness statement as well. New secondary plan policies shall include at a minimum information and policies respecting the following: the specific location and boundaries of the secondary plan area, the base for establishing objectives and policies of the secondary plan area, detailed objectives to be achieved in the secondary plan
And
area,
just to assist.
so on and so forth, and all the way down to
It's not bad.
F. The opportunities and constraints posed by unique features and characteristics. Yeah, specifically with respect to your question, it did not ask for a list to be produced, but only for it to be considered through the process of developing the secondary plan.
Thank you. Mr. Streisfeld went to a line of questioning regarding projects that were in the regional's capital budget, but weren't constructed or weren't under construction at this time. You recall that?
Yes.
And my question is, if it's in the capital budget, does that mean the project is funded?
Unfortunately, it does not mean that it's funded. The region has gone to multi-year budget approval. I do understand, and maybe a better question that can be, or the region when they are on the stand can reiterate, provide a little bit more information. It does not necessarily mean it's funded, but the fact that it's identified within the 10-year plan, it certainly is, the funding is more certain. The region is focused on budgeting those next 10 years rather than projects that are identified through their master planning process. Because it all starts off in the master plan, which is the broader sort of horizon of the 2041. And as those projects are prioritized, they're brought into a 10-year plan and they forecast based on that. Now, to say that with 100% certainty that will be delivered in time, no, but it certainly does give it a certain level of authority and certainty that projects that are not in that plan do not afford.
And as part of this process, you had discussions with the region, and did any of your discussions lead you to believe that there was any reason why this project would not be funded?
No, as a matter of fact, I guess when this process did start in 2017, I actually don't believe that project was in the 10-year capital plan. And throughout the process of developing the KDA plan, certainly we have had discussions with the region and they involve us through their prioritization exercises. And this is clearly a key importance for the municipality as a regional project. And through those discussions, that project was advanced and put into the 10-year plan. And actually subsequently, I think from the previous year to this year has been advanced to actually, it's been brought up in the plan, I think from 2027. Don't quote me exactly on this, but I think it was advanced by a year or two to 2026, which from my perspective indicates that there's a seriousness to deliver this project. The closer it gets to the front of that 10-year plan, the better, more likely it's going to be funded. I mean, we're currently in 2021, we're talking about a 2026 project. And notwithstanding that, at the same time, they're also starting to do work on that project. They're starting to do an environmental assessment, which I believe that they're going to go out this year to do. So they are spending money on the project, doing some of the preliminary legwork to get that project lined up. So, and there's a certain level of certainty that we have been given from municipal staff, and there seems to be progress on it. I hope maybe that's too much detail, but.
That's helpful, thank you. Mr. Wong, Mr. Streisfeld took you to the BA report and pointed out that there were positive net news in 3 of the quadrants and a negative net new traffic generation in 1 of the quadrants. And my question is, in your view, does the road network operate as a system?
Yes, the road network should and would operate as a system.
I have no.
I object to that question. It's completely improper. Completely improper. Because the question that he's asking is a question that he ought to have asked his witness in chief. That's very simple. Not everything that has been raised in cross is the subject matter of proper reply. But if that is the rule that we're going to work with, then if it's anything that's been asked, you ask, then I just need to understand what the rule of proper reply is. I'm just saying this isn't one of them.
Mr. Chair, I believe
Thanks.
the witness has already given his evidence in part on where I was going, so I'm happy to withdraw the question.
Okay.
Just heard a repetition of something that he said anyway, so that doesn't seem improper across to me. Correct.
Mr. Chair, I have no further questions.
Well, it's been an interesting day. And I must say, the witnesses have been very generous in their responses. Very generous. We'll see you at 9:30 tomorrow morning, and that's a parking panel.
It will be the parking panel up next. Mr. Kahar will be leading them through their evidence, and time permitting, we will then be hearing from Mr. Theodore on the urban design issues.
I have to insist, Mr. Chairman, on the following. The witness marked up a document. It's within Exhibit 28, and the document has to be formally secured by this tribunal. And so that's all I'm asking, is that the written notes that he made on Exhibit 28 be formally marked as an exhibit and be secured by this tribunal so that it has a proper
You mean
record.
that the lines that he's drawn on?
You mean number
document?
28 or 29? Could you
28.
clarify? Which-
Both.
28 is your visual evidence and the other is a quick sketch from memory.
Correct. When the witness gives evidence and he makes his own handwritten notes on a document to explain himself, I have simply asked that that document be marked as a formal exhibit and be secured by this tribunal as the record in the
We will
proceeding.
definitely secure it for you. Don't worry. Okay.
So there's, yes. Yeah. Or if I have another suggestion, perhaps we can give it to Mr. Kussner and we'll make reproductions from the stuff that's been marked. Thank you.
Tomorrow morning at 9:30.